turtles, rats, black suits with covered faces, throwing stars, and of course karate, mistakenly used as a general term for all Eastern martial arts. These are the first associations that come to mind when we hear the word ninja. But in reality, most of our ideas about these Japanese warriors of the night are plainly mistaken. And the name itself is the first place to start. Ninja is the Chinese reading of the character used to label these guys in the Middle Kingdom before the rest of the world heard about them. At home, these professionals, and it was a profession, were known as shinobi. It's not exactly known when or how the ninja clans first emerged, but in medieval Japan, it was almost inevitable that they would. In the episode about the samurai, we already described the meat grinder that the feudal Japan became. Wars between landowners hardly ever stopped. The main fighting units were the samurai. But they were largely constrained by the famous Bushido Code, which you've also heard about from us. Although they followed it not always consistently, there were still many things samurai considered beneath their dignity to do in war. It was okay to cut off peasant heads and pass them off as enemy samurai, but to engage in sabotage was beneath their dignity. These are the samurai. One way or another, this is where our heroes step onto the stage, shinobi, or as they're more commonly known, ninja. Unbound by any illusory perceptions. This is the Japanese region of Iga, mostly mountainous and almost always shrouded in mist. Almost every small village here is entirely inhabited by ninja. It's quite fair to say that this was a family, or even a clan and neighborhood, business. Born into a shinobi family, whether boy or girl, the choice was limited. Most likely, you'd become a shinobi yourself, starting training right from the cradle. But more on that later. A few dozen ninja live in their small village and engage in ordinary medieval activities like gardening and fishing. In a nearby region, a new conflict is erupting and a warlord urgently needs enemy fortress plans. Or before an attack to rescue hostages from there or do something similar. Samurai, of course, refuse to engage in such activities, so the warlord gathers a hefty sum and commissions the ninja clan for the necessary services. Shinobi were not warriors in the traditional medieval sense. Nor were they merely hired assassins, as they are often portrayed in modern popular culture. Ninja were among the first professional spies and saboteurs in human history. The ninja's main weapon was never the katana or their refined martial arts skills, but deception. They certainly had everything else as well, but they had to use their combat skills less often than one might think. In reality, shinobi were skilled in everything that might be needed during any phase of a conflict. It would not be an exaggeration to call them the elite special forces of their time. Ninja training really began almost immediately after birth. The cradle of the future James Bond was rocked gently but methodically against the wall, while the slightly older little shinobi was periodically spun and turned in different directions. This trained the vestibular system and developed perfect reflexes. Next came the study of reading, science, and the arts. Another proof that the stereotypical image of ninja has little to do with reality. One of the main disciplines mastered by each of these boys or girls was chemistry. A ninja had to be able to make, say, poison from plants found in the backyard, or craft an explosive device on the fly from whatever was available in the kitchen. Shinobi actively used gunpowder, borrowed from the Chinese, at a time when samurai largely ignored it. Of course, they paid plenty of attention to basic physical training. A recruit would be left almost naked in the snow-covered mountains for several days, where they had to survive relying solely on their own skills. When moving, a ninja paid attention to the smallest details. Footprints, shadows, reflections, the foundation of elite spies, intelligence officers, and special forces work today. Ninjutsu is a kind of manual for shinobi. This term is often misunderstood as just the close combat style of the ninja. But in reality, its meaning is much broader. Ninjutsu encompasses survival skills, the ability to blend with the environment, knowledge of medicine, astrology, and chemistry, as well as meditative techniques, and much more. There was also a huge section dedicated to the use of one's body in combat. The main tasks of a ninja were usually to avoid confrontation, to come and go unnoticed while accomplishing the mission. But if it came to throwing punches, even then, few could match these guys. Among other things, the ninjas' combat style was distinguished by elements specifically suited to their work. The focus was on silent, suffocating moves, sudden strikes from ambush or behind, and ninjas were trained to fight in confined, narrow spaces. They were flawless in their mastery of any weapon, even the samurai katana. And while ninjas are often depicted with this legendary sword today, they actually used it skillfully but very rarely. This weapon was too conspicuous and recognizable to be used regularly in espionage or sabotage missions. So the ninja's own sword was much shorter. It was not very often that ninjas had to use their famous throwing stars shurikens, although they were indeed almost always in a shinobi's pocket. They were mostly used as a last resort. The favorite melee weapon of the shadow warriors was the kusarigama. It is an ordinary peasant sickle with chain attached and a small weight at the other end. With this thing, one could strike the enemy, cut, stab, and even throw it the length of the chain, then pull it back. A fearsome weapon in skilled hands. And most importantly, inconspicuous. In disassembled form, the kusarigama is an ordinary farming tool. With one of these in a bag, it's not difficult to pass by the guards of some castle disguised as a peasant. Inside you could have fun, ninja style, arson, poisoning the water, assassinating enemy commanders, and everything in that vein. Much more often you could see shadow warriors in ordinary clothes, rather than their famous outfit. And you wouldn't even suspect that an elite killer was right next to you. The ability to transform was one of the most important skills for a shinobi. Although those costumes, in which we mostly imagine ninjas, are not a mere invention either. They were indeed used in night operations, just like many other tools from the arsenal of medieval Japanese James Bonds. The ninjas were tasked with infiltrating a castle where, due to the war, no one was allowed in, and either rescuing hostages or assassinating an important figure. The shinobi sneak up to the defensive walls at night. Ninjas avoided operations during a full moon or the 8 days around it, as darker nights made blending in easier. With special spikes on their boots and gloves, akin to modern climbing crampons, they easily scaled walls and cut their way inside. A unique saw knife, the shikoro, came in handy. Since buildings were made of bamboo and clay, the shikoro could carve a large enough hole in the wall for a ninja to slip inside and complete the task. If something went wrong, there were still a few surprises in the shinobi's bosom. While retreating, they scattered tetsubishi, metal spikes, behind them, discouraging pursuers from continuing the chase. If that wasn't enough, small bombs and the previously mentioned shurikens were put to use. All of this created a semi-mythical image of the ninja, even among their contemporaries. The clans themselves were eager to spread and uphold the tales that they possessed magic and other secret knowledge. Deception and trickery are just as much a weapon for a spy as a sword or a bow. For 700 years Japan was a land of continuous military conflict, and every army needed specialists in, let's say, unconventional methods of warfare. Anyone who didn't hire a ninja clan was most likely losing the conflict even before the final battle. Under such circumstances, it would seem that the question of who was truly the greater warrior in medieval Japan, ninjas or samurai, remains unanswered. After all, they fought on different fronts, and their branches of the military were different. However, at least one precedent of a direct mass confrontation did occur. In the 16th century, one of the military leaders, Oda Nobunaga, began ruthlessly seizing one Japanese province after another. The term came to Iga, the center of the ninjas, local clans, led by the legendary shinobi Hattori Hanzo, known as the Devil, lured a large samurai detachment sent by Nobunaga into a trap and almost completely destroyed it. Of course, even the ninjas couldn't stand against the overwhelming advantage in manpower. In the end, Nobunaga simply wiped out all life in the Iga region and most of its ninjas. However, the historical victors of this duel were the shinobi. Soon after, Nobunaga was killed by one of his generals, and in the chaos, a few dozen ninjas saved Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would later become shogun and bring Japan its first long-lasting peace in centuries. And behind him were those same ninjas. The profession of shinobi would officially cease to exist shortly after that. But the followers of these men, their tactics and methods, still operate in every army in the world, for no war can be won without those who hide in the shadows.